one of the things that can be a challenge is the FOMO that exists in the space. Like there is always so much going on in the space that it's really hard to like feel like you can ever rest. There's always something new happening. There might be some drama that's happening with people. There might be, a hack that happens. There might be just cool stuff. Most of the time, it's just cool stuff. I'm constantly amazed. So I get like the newsletters from like Avalanche and Chainlink and some of the other different organizations out there. And it's like there is so much to keep track of. And it's, how do you manage the FOMO of that? You're listening to the 26 podcast with Luke and Adrian. On this show, we celebrate the Web3 community, discuss the latest in blockchain-based projects, and help each other live our best lives. We're glad you're here, so let's get started.
Welcome to the 26 podcast with Luke and Adrian. Today, we are talking about a bunch of other stuff. You'll just have to listen to know what it is. Right, Luke?
That's right. We're free flowing. No, we do have a plan for what we're talking about today. We're going to chat a little bit about before we kind of get into the topic of the day. So as you all know from listening to the show, so we have really kind of three main things that we kind of focus on. So we focus on Web3 from a technology perspective, Web3 from a community perspective, but then also life. So one of the things that we really hope that this podcast does for you is really kind of helping you with overall things that you want to accomplish in life, whether that may be in Web3, which in a lot of cases it will, and today's topic is going to really pertain to that, or just things that we kind of experience and have some things to share that may help you in other ways, whether that be in career development, in personal development, in interpersonal relations, all those kinds of things. So today we're going to lean a little bit more on that. You've heard us talk in the past about balance. And so today we're going to kind of dig into that a little bit more, because usually when we talk about it, we kind of start at a high level, but really we're going to kind of dig a little bit deeper into that. So Age, why don't you kind of start us off with just kind of what are your thoughts in terms of balance? How do you define balance?
Oh, loaded question, Luke. And I will say, Luke, you are a master, my brother. You're a master in so many ways and so many different things. They just don't know it. They just don't know it yet, Luke.
A master debater. That's my
debater. He does like cocking you, folks. He's a master debater. He's a pro at it, let me tell you. I shared a room with this guy. Oh, geez, that's an awesome one, Luke. That's what I'm saying, man. Balance. Sometimes it's fair, sometimes it's not. But if you can debate and master the debate, Luke, you do your thing, brother. But I think balance, dude. I'm a little skewed because I think my idea of balance has definitely changed since my talk with Gary Vee a little bit. But I think truly everybody has like this different idea of balance. For me personally, it's always been based on, I know I've said it quite often, but I give praise to Stephen Covey with the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, because truly he has kind of helped out with that balance per se, meaning that, especially when you're in sales and you don't have like, say, a set hours, and maybe you are in sales and you do have set hours, but being a real estate broker, it's always been kind of like a 7-day a week. I wouldn't say 365, but maybe 360 days out of the year. To me, balance was always trying to make sure that, especially when the kids were younger and being married and everything else, it was just truly just not letting my business career take over, my sales career take over, and not having enough time with my spouse or with my kids. Because when you're sales driven, it's all, we're not paid unless we sell something. So a lot of times that drive and sometimes, and I would say most times, it was out of necessity, right? So it was this balance of like, man, I got to put food over the table and pay my mortgage and my bills and everything else. Like, I need this deal, so I need to do whatever it takes to get this deal done, versus, on the other side, there was sacrifice. I was coaching Little League, but sometimes there would be games or practices that I just had to cancel or miss, or dinner with friends that I would be like 2-3 hours late for. So in a sense, there's always this sense of balance that is, as Gary would say, bullshit. Because it kind of is sometimes. Because if it's there's some agreements and there's disagreements with what Gary says, but I understand because it's totally different from one person to another. For me, going back to it myself would be spending my time with my kids during their youth was super important. And what Stephen Covey would always say is that business will always be there, but your child's childhood will not. And I'm noticing that as my kids get older, that is absolutely true. And what Gary Vee basically has stated in some of in the small little mini interview that I did with him, you're going to notice that later on in life, how good your balance was when, say, they were younger, because hey, dad was never home because dad was always working or doing his thing or spending more time with other people, whatever it may be, whatever the perception was, and not with me, or he was missing my games or wasn't there for my whatever little graduation or my little play or whatever it may be. So I think truly, man, there's not really a good answer. I think the answer is truly within yourself and what you would say, going back to Stephen Covey, because he's a freaking master of his book. But it's, what do you want people to say at your funeral? What do you want your kids to say at your funeral? What kind of a person are you? What kind of person do you want people to think that you are, or to know who you are? And what do you want them to say? Right? I think that's one of the biggest things, Luke, is, what Stephen would say is keep the end in mind. And keeping that end in mind, which is pretty much the end, is like your funeral. That's probably the last time somebody's going to say something about you in public, in most cases anyway. What do you want them to say? I mean, are you going to try to be somebody? Maybe it's not natural, and maybe you need to, push yourself to be somebody or be that compassionate person. I want, none of us are perfect. I'm not perfect. I have a lot of flaws, of course. My better half is definitely a lot better than I am in terms of like compassion and caring. But I like to say that, she also rubs off on me and makes me a better person. I think we can sometimes be like that to each other. And it's truly, Luke, I think it is keeping the end in mind. And you have to determine as a person, and as an individual, on what kind of person do you really want to be known as when you're dead, right? I mean, or when you're gone. Um, and also, from that early time to the end, there's something in the middle too, to where, how much time do you want to spend with the people that you care for, and are they going to want to spend the time with you? If you were being an ass all the time to your kids, they probably don't want to hang out with you later on in life if you weren't always there, or somebody they can confide with. So, when it goes down to what Gary was saying, is it just truly depends on every person and what kind of a person they want to be and who they want to be known as at the end. So it's not an easy answer, or even a question to answer, but I won't stumble my words. I will say it as concise as I can. But I think that's kind of my opinion, though, Luke. For me, myself, and it's more of a, it's truly like, what kind of a dad is do I want to be for my kids, and what kind of a husband do I want to be for my wife? Because that is truly what's important to me. And I think that's what the answer kind of comes down to, is what's truly important to you. Is being known as being, the number one sales guy in the city or the office or whatever it may be. Yes, you could have both. It's just definitely not easy. And there's definitely sacrifice somewhere down the road. It's not, it's hard to have full success in what you do and also be very, very successful within your personal life. Not saying it's not possible, but I'll have to say it's not freaking easy. It's sometimes a balance, and maybe it's a 60-40, 70-30, but there's always going to be a sacrifice, I think, in my opinion, on one side or the other. It just depends on what your personal preference is. What do you think, man?
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that I think there's a lot of different layers of what to balance. I think sometimes folks, like kind of you were talking about, kind of think of it as like two things. So it's career, and then it's personal life with the family and that kind of thing. And I think that those are definitely some really important things that you want to balance. I think there's also some other things that maybe not everybody thinks about in terms of what is it like? What is the life that you're trying to live? Right. So it's not just like I think a big part of that we didn't kind of touch on in that is yourself. Like you have a self too. You're not just an employee or an entrepreneur and a family member, but you're also you. And what is you like? What are the things that are important to you that drive your happiness or drive your sense of accomplishment or drive your interest? So I think those are some of the things that also is important to kind of take into account as you think of that. Like I know for me, like obviously, I have my roles in my career, I have my roles on the podcast, I have my roles, with my girlfriend, my dogs, my siblings, but then I also have other things. Like I have the me part of all that. And I think it's important to kind of be thinking about those as you're kind of crafting what that balance looks like. It's something that, for me personally, I've been doing a lot of kind of self reflection on. So I think those that listen to the show quite a bit know that I just finished a master's degree, or actually technically on Monday I do. So by the time this episode comes out, it will be in the past, but as of today, it's not. So July 1st. So I have a master's in blockchain, but because of how high stress that time was, like year and a half of, adding in this entire like full-time degree program plus work plus my social life plus that, I'm finding that a whole lot of things kind of got uh, deprioritized, and they're not necessarily things that I would want to. So I've spent a lot of time recently, personally, kind of thinking through, okay, how do I kind of get back to that place of balance? So some of the other things besides my roles and my relationships and that kind of thing is just, things like my health. That's an area that I don't know that everyone always thinks about. They're like, okay, well, my health will take care of itself. Well, maybe when you're very young, it does. But as you get older, you got to have that as something you carve out time to handle, whether that might mean your eating habits, whether that might mean your exercise habits. Those are things that are important there. Another big one that people don't spend a lot of time on is their mental state. Like, what are the things that you do that help you to be in a good place, mentally? And I'm not talking about like therapy or those kinds of things. Some folks that may be a thing that helps them, but just in general, like whether you have some kind of spiritual element to what's important to you, whether you have a kind of a meditation routine that you have, a journaling routine, all those things are things that can help you to have like better peace of mind, whether it's, or it could even just be like you like to go for walks in the outdoors. That can also be something that really can help there. Another big one, your finances. Do you have time that you spend doing things that are going to help your finances be the way that you want them to be, whether it's planning for retirement, planning for goals, financial stability, all those kinds of things are important. You know, those are just a few things to be thinking about. And so I think kind of getting back to the way you balance those things, I think the first step in all of that is to think about those things and figure out, what feels good in each of those different areas that are important to you. Like, what will that feel like? And then kind of figuring out how to get there, but also don't stress out about every minute of your day is planned to try to accomplish all the things in there. There's going to be some days where you don't touch four of those priorities because you need to give your attention to two other ones that need it that day. So I think that's just a few things to be thinking about in terms of like, what does balance mean? It's not just a yin and a yang of, a career and a family, but also the things that make you happy, the things that drive to the person you want to be, the goals that you have, all the relationships you have as well.
That's good, Luke. I mean, I think you brought up some good points too, because of course those are. I probably just told you my top two, right? You kind of focus on those top two because finances and family are probably, obviously very important. If you're a religious person, God is obviously definitely an important part of that as well. But I think you nailed it too, Luke, with physical health. I kind of put physical health with also mental health because those things I think truly are very important because without health and even mental health, like you're gonna be fucked up, right? I mean, dude, if you're not taking care of yourself, like you can't do the other two without taking care of yourself
Yeah.
and without being mentally strong or mentally fit And I think you're absolutely right, Luke. And I know you and I both go through that. I know, of course, we're obviously not the only ones that go through it as well. Are there any things that you do generally to help with, I would say, like mental health in terms of, for your example, being so, dude, I don't even know how you did it, but seriously, like working full time, getting a master's degree in blockchain, juggling a relationship, juggling finances, juggling, events that we put on the podcast. I mean, dude, it's definitely a lot. Like, are there things that you do to help out with your mental stability? Because I think I've seen you a few times to where like, oh shit, Luke's about to blow.
Yeah,
Luke's exhausted. He's about to fall over. And it's important, right? I mean, truly, as my brother, I'm like, dude, like, what do I need to do, Luke? You look totally overwhelmed. Like, what do you do in those cases? And that was probably like almost near consensus, right? I mean, you were in a rare state that I've really never really seen you in before. Like, how did you go through that? Like, how did you recover? And granted, you were going on like limited amount of sleep, which is also not good. But are there any like certain things that you did in that example that kind of like helped you out?
I don't know that I would say that I have a tip or like a magic thing because obviously it was a very challenging time, and I think there are going to be some times where there's not a right answer. It's just a matter of like, can you power through it? And it's also important to kind of know when powering through it is the right thing to do, or if maybe you do need an actual break. So I think that's an important thing because and we're going to talk about FOMO here in a little bit, but I think that that's something that sometimes folks can get caught up into. Like, I got to do all the things. And I think even for me, to an extent, I had a period of time where I was trying to do all the things, and it does take its toll. There's always some trade off between things that you're trying to accomplish and the cost that it has, whether it's a financial cost, a physical cost, a mental, emotional cost, all those kinds of things. I don't necessarily have a right answer for that, but I would say that sometimes the fact that you've gone through challenging times like that before can help you to know that you can go through them again. So I think there's always something to be learned from like experiences that you have. So, like, for example, for me, like physically, one of the most challenging times that I've ever had was when I was training for the Ironmans that I did. Because like you get to a point in those trainings where it's just like all you want to do is go inside in the dark and sleep on a Saturday morning after a 6 hour bike ride. Or, the race itself obviously is very challenging because it's a whole lot longer than that. But the fact that you've kind of gone through those things, you can kind of reflect on like, okay, this is going to be hard, but I know that I can do it because I've done something else that was also different, but also hard. So I think that's probably the best tip that I would have is just reminding yourself of other times when you've been able to get through challenging times. Is probably the main thing that I would say, specifically during that time, because there was no getting around it. There was no um, so, listener, just for a little bit of backstory. So we had the Coxensus event, which is awesome. We had a great time. Also, I got COVID, and then I also had a big assignment for one of my classes that had to be turned in, and also two final exams. And it was a very challenging time, but there was no way to not do the things I had to do. I just had to do them. So I just made it happen. But yeah, so that's kind of what I would say is just draw back on your past experiences.
Do you ever go back to like your wrestling days and say, man, this moment right now is nothing like wrestling practice used to be? And Iron Man, maybe the Iron Man training was a little bit different, or maybe a lot different. But do you go back to where like those moments, or any moment, like a hard moment in your life or your career, where you're like, this sucks, but it doesn't suck as much as doing this? And I'm talking more like wrestling practice.
Um, Probably not wrestling. It's been a while since I was in wrestling. So so listeners, if you haven't heard me talk about wrestling before, so I wrestled for the 4 years of high school, so freshman through senior year. But it's been a little bit of time since I graduated high school. I'm not going to completely share how long ago that was, but it's been a while. You can see the gray in the beard. You
Come
can
on, let them know. Let
guess
them
how long
know.
ago that's been. The Ironman was more recently. I did the the most recent one I did in 2018. I did the other one in 2016. So it's been a little bit closer to now, although now it's getting on 8 years since I did the first one. But what I would say, like probably the best example of I can't stop is, so the first one I did was called Ironman Canada. It's in Whistler, Canada, which is a beautiful place. It's up north of Vancouver, in Western Canada. It's also where they had the Winter Olympics a few years back. Beautiful place. But if you can imagine that they had the Winter Olympics there, which means it's a ski resort and there's like all kinds of stuff that you do like that, there's some mountains there. And there was this one really long mountain. I think it was probably at least a 30% grade, and it was probably about 6 miles long. It was very hard. Going down, it was super easy, but coming back up, like this is mile 90 in the 112 mile bike ride. And it was so steep that I'm not the best at clipping in and out of my clips, even though I've ridden the bike a bunch of times. It was so steep that I knew that if I stopped even for a second, I wasn't going to be able to get back on the bike. Because you have to get some momentum to be able to clip in, and it was too steep to get any momentum. So I'd have had to ride down the mountain and somehow flip a U-turn and come back up. It just wasn't going to happen. And my hamstrings were in so much pain. I was exhausted, and it was just like, you just have to do it. And there's no getting around it. You either don't finish the race and you walk up this mountain on foot, or you just handle it. And I did. There's been a little like flashbacks after that from how traumatic it was and how hard it was. But that would probably be the main example of like, sometimes you just have to like, just get through it and know that at some point the pain will be over. And that's what you do.
It's like our buddy Clint that would say, get a straw and suck it up. That's a good old military
Yeah.
saying. And I have to say, guys, if you ever get to see Luke in person, Luke's got the most amazing calves that I've ever seen. So if you see Luke, don't make him feel bad, and just look at his calves and say, "Wow, Luke has amazing calves." And so when you're going up this hill, Luke, I'm envisioning this cloudy, overcast. You going up this hill that I probably would have pulled over and just walked my bike up because I'm not that dedicated. But I can see your calves, Luke. I see your calves because Luke is a super fast walker too, and he's always in front of me. So what do I get to look at? I get other than his calves.
All right.
That was
Well,
totally off subject.
let's get
Sorry,
back on
totally
topic.
totally
On
off
topic with
subject.
balance. So one of the things that I can tend to think about with balance, specific to the Web3 space, and many of you listening, if you're involved in Web3, which I think most of our listeners are, one of the things that can be a challenge is the FOMO that exists in the space. Like, there is always so much going on in the space that it's really hard to like feel like you can ever rest. Especially, as we hear like folks that are project founders and things like that, that there's no rest in the space. There's always something new happening. There's always something going on. There might be some drama that's happening with people. There might be, a hack that happens. There might be just cool stuff. Most of the time it's just cool stuff. I'm constantly amazed. So I get like the newsletters from like Avalanche and Chainlink and some of the other different organizations out there. And it's like, there is so much to keep track of. And it's, how do you manage the FOMO of that? So if you think of just like the tokenomics of different projects, like if you really want to understand, something like a chicken or like a step-in or like all those different things that have these different token models, it's a lot to wrap your head around. So like just thinking of how do you stay engaged, because, obviously you're here because you are interested in the topic, maybe you work in the space, but how do you also kind of balance that with everything else that happens outside of Web3? So Adrian, just kind of any initial thoughts from your end on kind of how you do it, or maybe where you have challenges, and we can talk about that as well.
I'm gonna go on the Gary V stance to say fuck balance in crypto and Web3. It doesn't exist. It's either you do it or you don't. It's one of those, truly, Luke. It's one of those things. It's like trying to keep up with all the discords. And I remember some of those X posts of like how many unread Discord messages people have. It's like it's truly, it's just, you have to pick a few in my book. I feel bad because there's a lot of them that I can't be as involved with, like say even Chicken Discord. Like I rarely am even in Discord. So it's it's truly, and I have alerts that come up in certain groups which are do the really great conversations. Like, dude, it's you have to kind of pick a what you're going to be a part of, and I think that's going into not so much into the community, but you're able to pick the community that best suits you and stick within that community. And I think you could be a part of each one of those communities, but it's just not going to maybe be as in depth as this is my main community. And I think Luke, you and I think kind of go on this whole thing where sometimes, I'll keep you in tune. It's probably more you keeping me in tune than certain other projects, because maybe you have your alerts turned on, or maybe you're just in different discords or whatever it may be. But I have to say, man, it can be super, super overwhelming. And I'm probably I compartmentalize things, and I just put them in a box. And like if it's too overwhelming because I have more focus elsewhere, like I just shut it down. Um, I got even like being on the podcast yesterday, it's like, dude, I've been MIA for like a week. Like I haven't jumped on spaces, I haven't jumped on anything, but that's mainly because I had to focus, right? I can't. We had guests in town, family in town, so I couldn't necessarily like shut them out for an hour or whatever it may be. It's to me, I have a very easy shut on, shut off switch to where I can shut things off and turn them back on pretty easily. But sometimes, it's hard because it's not the easiest thing to do. But I think that's where I can control my balance per se.
Yeah.
Is that there's all these extra curricular activities that you could do and be a part of, and you don't want the FOMO. And sometimes like it passed, it's like, oh shit, dude, I missed out on those pins, those VFriends pins. For having a VF1, we had a 50% off. Dude, they sold out. I think they might have sold off to all the VF1s. And
Yeah.
then I see the alert and I missed out. I'm like, fuck, because in my head I was like, oh, in 30 minutes I could get on my computer and actually do it, right?
Yeah.
Dude, I didn't do it. I didn't do it until I saw Adam Rips come on and say sold out, and then you got this FOMO, right, of like not missing it. But anyway, it's like, hey, I missed it. Yeah, it sucks, but it is what it is. Like I had to
Yeah.
do XYZ. I think you and I were talking about that, Luke. It's the I think, and you probably have more skills on how to organize like important factors. Like I'm one of those fire guys to where if something's on fire, I have to go put it out. Like it's just depending on what it is, of course. But with say like a furnished rental situation, I'm going to tell you right now, dude. And this is what I was talking to you earlier in the week. Like if utilities shut off because my card expired and didn't get paid, and now people are out there without water or without electricity, or God forbid without internet. That's actually what I was dealing with, was internet. It's like that's when things stop what I'm doing, put out the fire, and I'm sometimes get so caught up with putting out fires that you have to put other things like on a hold. And I think that was one of our main things, like rescheduling our recording. Like I was putting out fires. You had to drive 4.5 hours to knock something out because I can't get anybody to show up out there because it's a small town and nobody wants to work for not. I mean, not even nothing. Just anyway, fair wage. Everything's like 10 times more expensive. So a lot of times I go out there, I take care of it, and I knock out 4 different things. I was handy manny and I was doing a bunch of plumbing work because I had water freaking flooding out of a stupid dishwasher, and then the toilet started going and flooded it. I mean, anyway, it was so stressful. Like it was nothing like, I mean, there's deadlines because people are still showing up that evening to have a good time on their vacation, and they catch me in there with a high industrial blower blowing down the carpet so it dries, and I'm over there with a screwdriver in the chair while they're walking in, and like, is everything okay here? And anyway, I probably went a little too far onto the explanations of what I went through the other day, which
Yeah.
is what it's dealing with a fire versus like prioritizing all the other things that are going on in your life at the same time, right? And then
Yeah.
driving 4.5 hours in the getting home at 2 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, those are my
Yeah.
X times sometimes.
So I want to touch on. I want to dive into that a little bit deeper here in a bit. But before we do that, I do want to kind of touch on what you were talking about, the balancing of the Web3, because there's so much to be engaged in, especially the Discord. So I can share with you like what works for me is a few things. So one is I'll turn off all the non-necessary alerts. So all the like general channels, those kinds of things, I'll turn all of those notifications off. Like it's so incredibly rare that anybody messages me. I don't need to see all the channel stuff that people put out there, that kind of things. That cuts down a lot. So basically, what I get is all the announcements channels. If it's a project that I really want to stay connected with, I'll make sure that that is set to alert, because sometimes there is time sensitive stuff that I need to know about in those. It'll hit my watch. I'll get to at least see what it is, and I can go on there and figure out what it is there. So kind of honing my alerts so that only the ones that I need to know about I do. And then for the rest of them, what I do is time blocking. So I have different groups of Discords that there's some that I check every day. There's some that I check once a week. There's some that I check probably once a month. And I just have it in my calendar and I'll just go look through it. And that way, if it's one like a Chicken or a V Friends or a Vayner Sports Pass or a few other ones that I want to stay real connected with, I'll make sure to go in there and just at least take a peek at them every day. And I don't feel like I have to be in there all the time. Now, Discord is not my favorite tool. If there's other tools that are out there, there's Slack, there's Circle, there's other ones that are out there that I look a little bit more because you can like actually catch up on everything. Discord's more of like if you weren't there when it was a live conversation, it's hard to catch up to it. But I'll at least skim through it and get to know what's going on with that. And that helps me not to feel like I need to be in everything all the time, that kind of thing. So I think that time blocking is one of the things that can help. So that way, instead of feeling like you need to be in there all day long, if you have the time for that, that's totally cool. But if not, then at least you can kind of stay connected to the gist of what's happening and that kind of thing. So that's what I do for that.
No, that's pretty good,
But
man. I got to change my alert settings. It's a little overwhelming when you hear
managing your alerts.
When you hear,
That's number one.
When you hear that beeping and that chiming, dude, all day long, because it's like, why did I set that alert? But I think you're right though, because with the alerts, dude, because I've missed out, dude, on say the VSP or Vayner Sports Pass. When they had those poker tournaments, dude, I missed out like on 4 poker tournaments, and they were important. They were important to me because they had certain prizes that go with them for the winners, and it's like, that's what I say. Make time to set the alerts. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I missed out on
because otherwise it just
too.
becomes. Yeah. Other times it just becomes white noise. If you have so many alerts, like. So, listeners, if you ever meet Adrian in person, ask him to show you the number of unopened emails he has in his mail app. How many 100,000 do you have right now, bro? Can you pull up your phone and tell me the latest number?
You want a live figure? You want a live, dude?
Yeah. You don't have to show the phone, but just tell me.
Luke freaks out because he opens up my phone and he sees all those little red circles everywhere. And with my email, it's actually blanked out, Luke, believe it or not.
Oh, maybe I turned it off last time I was near your phone. I think
because you looked at my phone, you're like, "Oh my god, you gotta shut that off."
It was over 100,000 unread emails.
Last time it was like 430,000 emails. But you have to understand how much junk I get, right? So I'm a line item guy.
So why
I don't want to waste my time. It's like you figure it's 430. If that was 1,000 emails a day, 500, 200, 300.
I'm not saying
spending that much time deleting. No, even deleting. It might take 30 minutes just to delete. When data is so cheap, just buy the data and just let it fucking sit there. Because when I do a mass delete, if I ever do one, but then I can search for it and then delete all, and it's so much easier that way. So I know, dude. Don't get me on the emails. Luke
There's
is
also
like,
a mark all as read function, and you can just just archive them all.
I don't need to read them all. I don't even need to push that button. Well, sometimes I need to know if I read it or not, because I mean, obviously the important ones, because I'm a subject line reader, and if I don't know you or it's like a subject line, dude, I'm scrolling, dude. It's like TikTok, just scrolling, Luke. I don't have time to like like it or not like it. I just scroll it.
Yeah,
And then
I
if I
got
hit
you.
one, then I'm watching it.
Yeah. But speaking of TikTok, so if you're a listener of the show and you want to find us on TikTok, we actually just started posting things on TikTok. So if you find us at 26 Media on there, we'd love to have you find us on there as well. But yeah, well, let's Adrian, do you want to dig into what you were talking about before with kind of what I would refer to as the balance between the proactive elements of your life and the reactive? And I think some people would think that, okay, well, if you have enough proactive, then there is no reactive. And that's not a realistic way of kind of living your life. Like that can't happen. So you need to have both. There always are going to be things you have to react to, but the more proactive you are, the less of those things are going to exist. And it's not a yes, it's not an if type thing or an either or kind of thing. It's both, right? So you want to do
And
both. So yeah, it's an and. So one of the things I would say is that you want to, and this is another going back to Stephen Covey. It's a thing that if I can find the video, I'll link it in the show notes. But if not, you should be able to Google it. It's the Big Rocks. So basically, what it is he has an example where he takes a, a it's a bucket that he needs to fit a certain number of rocks, and they're about like 2 inches in diameter rocks. He has some smaller rocks, and then he has some sand. And then the challenge is, let's get all of this stuff into this bucket. And so you have the sand in there already. And if you try to like stick all those rocks in there, there's no way to get it all to fit. And so the reason and in this analogy, the sand is kind of the stuff that like the less important stuff, medium-sized rocks are of medium importance and the big rocks are important. So the way that he does that is he empties out the bucket, puts in the big rocks first, fills in it with the medium-sized rocks, and then pours the sand on top. And the sand just kind of seeps into the cracks, and you can kind of fit everything in that way. So the point of the analogy is that if you try to cram in those things that are most important to you, and again, kind of going back to the beginning, those things, quote unquote, are things like, time with your family, development in your career, things that you do for your personal, physical, mental health, creativity, those kinds of things that are important. If you only try to squeeze them in to all the other chaos of your life, you're never going to accomplish those things. And it's going to stress you out. You're going to have guilt type of things. Maybe you're just not going to do them. And you're just going to live your life kind of running in circles. And so what you want to do is, okay, figure out what are those important things. And you want to also resist the temptation to over plan for yourself. That's where the key is, I think, is that you're not like sometimes people think, okay, I'm going to plan out my day. And then you look at their calendar and they have every minute of the whole day planned out. And it's like, okay, well, that's not going to work because some of these things are going to take you longer than you thought. You're going to have some people that have critical, urgent needs, like Adrian, like you were just talking about with, something goes wrong with one of your rental properties or, those of you that have kids,
lots
something
of big
happens with one of your
rocks.
kids.
Lots of
And
big
so, and
rocks.
that's, so yeah, but you carve out time for that, right? So you know that, okay,
Oh,
you have, let's say 12 hours in a day that you can do things. Well, you only want if you're the type of person that has a lot of things come up, then you go into your planning process knowing that that okay, I'm probably going to have 4 hours of legitimately important interruptions that need to happen today, and out of a total of let's say 10 hours I have to do things. Because I know that at least 4 of those hours are going to get something unexpected come up. I really should only plan for 2 to 4 hours of proactive things because I never know when those things are going to happen. And so you kind of plan for it that way. So I think it's just taking that step. It's don't surrender yourself to, okay, well, I live a reactive life. You can still plan things that are important and just know that you have the flexibility in your plan to react when you need to and get those important things done, when they need to be done.
you're an awesome planner, Luke. I'm
Thanks.
totally reactive. I run in circles sometimes. No, no, I don't always run in circles. But no, did you take the Stephen Covey workshop? Sounds like you did.
I did.
Yeah.
So I think I'm sure my certification's expired by now, but actually at one time I was certified to train as like an actual Franklin Covey endorsed facilitator for focus achieving your highest priorities. So that was I loved teaching that class. It was a lot
It's
of
as
fun.
valid as my EMT certification.
Well, so it's still
Probably.
valid. Like
No,
the
I know,
knowledge is
valid
still
too.
valid. You just have to you have to teach the class every so often, or you lose your
No, I
license
get
to
it. I'm
do it.
just I'm giving you a hard time.
No, it's still good, and I still remember
No,
the
it is
things. Now
good.
a lot's
I was like,
changed.
that's not in the book, right? I mean, it's that sounds like a workshop item, like fitting, like they would actually give you a bucket and try to figure out fit it all in. But I think you're right, though, dude. You're 100% right, Luke, because there are certain things I think where I struggle with my planning, and you and I talk about this quite often. Like my planning is, I guess it depends on what you're due to, right? If you're in front of a computer, you can probably do a lot more things when you have a phone and a computer in front of you versus having to do like physical things, like the physical things, like taking the kids to the doctor's appointment, and maybe it's not an emergency, but the emergencies are what like jacks your whole schedule. It's and especially when nobody can help, and sometimes if it's only you that can do it, that's the hard part. And I know you probably get it from me, Luke. It's like, well, will 2 weeks from now on Wednesday work for you? And it's like, I think so, because to me, it's like I'm very reactive, and it's more of like, hey, if a fire comes up, and even with my work, it's the same thing. It's like, yeah, you might have, oh, I'm going to do prospecting from this time to that time. Oh, I'm going to do letters from this time to that time. And then you get this thing that comes over and just says, if this doesn't happen, this is not going to happen. If you don't do this, it's not going to happen. And it just takes over your life, right? And I think for certain items, depending on the emergency level of it, a lot of times those things can wait. But it's juggling, because I call it is juggling the big rocks in your example with the medium-sized rocks. And sometimes the sand, like checking your discords, may not happen, but it's definitely a balance, man. I think it's definitely different for everybody, and I think you're absolutely right. But I like your insight, man. I think you're right, because you're definitely not only are you a master debater, you're a master planner.
Well, thanks, bro. Yeah, the other thing I would share too. This is another concept from Franklin Covey, and I think it actually, I want to say I heard recently that it might have originated from like Teddy Roosevelt as well, so which is totally possible because he's awesome and had great ideas and thoughts. But so it's the time matrix is what it's called, and if I can find a version of it, if I might be able to put it up on the screen now so you can see it. If not, I'll link to it because it's a great process. But really, what it does, it's kind of two axes. So there's one that's focused on urgency. So you have on one end of the spectrum the urgent things, and then the other one the not urgent things. And then the other direction, so let's say the x-axis, it looks at the importance. So you end up having four quadrants. You have urgent and important, not urgent and important, not urgent and not important, and urgent and not important. And so the idea is that you start to kind of identify the things in your life that come up or happen, or even just in real time, thinking about, okay, is this thing urgent and important? If so, those are the definitely have to do things, right? So, like to your example before, if it's a matter of maintaining your business, yeah, it's urgent and important. You got to make sure you plan out time to be able to handle those things that are urgent and important. You also have some things that are not urgent, but they're important, um, or but important. So those are the things that if you allow them to not get done for long enough, they will become urgent and important. And you don't want to do that. You want to handle those things while they're still not urgent. So if it's a matter of, hey, I have this event coming up, and it's not for 3 months, but there's some things I can do now that are going to help me to get it ready. That the more you can handle the things when they're still in that quadrant, the better. So when you're thinking of prioritizing your time, those are the two that you want to spend the majority of your time in. You also have the things that are urgent and not important. Those usually tend to be things that are somebody else's priorities. So maybe it's not important to you, but it's important for part of your relationship. So maybe it does make its way up to that, upper quadrant of important and urgent. But sometimes it's just things that feel important. So somebody's rushing you to do something, but it's not really necessary for it to be rushed. Like they just want the task complete, but it doesn't really have to be, or, it's just something that kind of person that panics about stuff, whatever. So it's identifying that, hey, this is not important, but there is some pressure of urgency. And it's figuring out, does it have to get done or not? Sometimes the answer to that's yes. Sometimes the answer to that's no. And then the last one is the not urgent and the not important stuff. And those things, sometimes you do them and sometimes you don't. So if it's a matter of, catching up on something that's like the latest in Discord, maybe that's not either of those things, but it's still an enjoyable thing for you to do. So you still do it. Or maybe it's just a waste of your time to be scrolling on some site that you don't really isn't going to help you, but it's taking away from your time you need to be spending in the other quadrants. So those are just a few things to be thinking about if you think about how do you spend your time. But the more you can spend in those top two of the important ones, the urgent and important or not urgent and important, the more balanced you're going to feel overall. So I think that's just an important concept there. Again, I wish I could say it was my idea. It's definitely not. Like I learned it from Franklin Covey, but would really, if you're struggling with balance in general, I would really urge you to consider those two things, like the big rocks and then the urgency and important, and figuring out like where do you sit in that space and where can you do a little bit better and where are you already doing well.
That was good, man. Actually, I do remember reading that. And it just, I think when it came back, I was going to be in the fire department just a long time ago. Those days are over. I didn't go in, but you go through all this, like training, right? But it's like you put yourself in like a really bad situation that a fireman would actually go up to, and you're deciding the urgency of exactly what you're talking about. Things that are, needing immediate attention or not immediate attention. And in that case, it's a lot different. It's a lot more pressing, but it's a one way or the other. It's one of the it's definitely one of those things that makes your life a little bit easier. And you're absolutely right, Luke, because it was always dealing with those two quadrants of the important and urgent, and what was it, urgent but not important, or important but not urgent? That one, right? But it's spending your time in the second quadrant was so much more powerful to not have the important and urgent. And I think that's where, early on in my career, that's where it was kind of a focus on, because everything became urgent if you didn't focus on it, because you wanted to play with the sand and throw more sand in your bucket because, it's sand. But anyway, you find yourself in the urgent bucket really fast. That was good, Luke. I think you nailed it, dude. I think that's great. And Stephen Covey,
Thanks,
man, I
bro.
mean, it's like that price. It's like a Zig Ziglar almost. It's just like priceless life information that's actually life and work, right? It's personal and business. I think I strive on. I listened to the first 5 chapters of 7 Habits of Effective People 5 times before I read through the entire book. We can talk about figuring out yourself. Ooh, it's a dangerous one.
Yeah.
Figuring out who you are and what your faults are. Oh, man. As Michael Jackson would say, the man in the mirror. Ooh, sometimes scary. But it's good to know yourself, because you can't change and can't improve, in my opinion, until you do know yourself and you know your faults, you know your strengths, and you know what you need to do to improve. And that's one of those biggest things, guys. Is it's a it's a Pulp Fiction quote. That little sound in the back of your head. It's pride. Pride just messes you up. We all have a little bit of pride, but just truly putting that pride to the side and truly sucking it up and knowing who you are as an individual, taking responsibility is freaking huge. Yep. I think that's probably one of my biggest things. I don't mind blaming myself, or it's not even blaming myself, but it's like, what could I have done differently to change that outcome, even though that outcome was not entirely my fault. But I think it's huge, and I don't know about you, Luke, but it's huge for me to just say, well, I could have probably done X, Y, Z, and we could have probably had a different outcome, even though it didn't, whatever. It just not being afraid of like taking some of the heat, especially off the person who maybe all the heat fell on. I think it just definitely helps out a little bit, especially if you're in a team environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome, bro. Well, this has been a good conversation there. I think that a couple things we'll share before we kind of wrap up is just kind of where you can find some of this information if you're interested in that. So we'll try to link to as much as we can in the show notes. So I know 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is definitely available on Amazon or wherever you get your books. So we'll link to that here. If I can find it, I'm not sure if Focus Achieving Your Highest Priorities is still available in audiobook form. They didn't write it as a book, but it was an audiobook. So if it is, I'll link to that that as well, along with anything else that we can think of that can really be helpful. But hopefully today's episode was helpful to you if you're kind of struggling with some of these things. If you have any books that you would recommend on this topic, if you'd be so kind as to include them as a comment in either whatever app you're using, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, we'd love to be able to share that with other listeners, read it ourselves possibly, just to kind of get a better sense of that. Because obviously, living our best life is one of the things that's really important to both Adrian and I. And so we're always looking for ways to develop or to do that as well.
Always looking to
but
improve
with
for
that,
sure.
with that, Adrian?
Sorry, I cut you off.
Okay.
Always looking to improve, right? I mean, so if you guys have something that works for you, obviously Luke and I don't read a whole lot, but I listen to audiobooks because I am in the car quite often. But man, I would love to hear some of your favorite audiobooks on self-improvement or just prioritizing mental health, whatever it may be. I think anything you guys share with us, we would definitely be open to it because I'm always looking to improve.
Awesome. All right, bro. Well, I think great chatting with you as always. Listeners, thanks so much for sticking with us, and we will talk to you soon.
2-6.
Thanks for tuning in and spending some quality time with us. We're all about bringing value, and we hope today's episode hit the mark for you. If you like what you heard, follow us wherever you get your podcast, and while you're at it, give us a rating and share some comments letting us know what you'd like us to cover in future episodes. If you know someone who'd appreciate our content as much as you do, we'd love it if you share this podcast with them. It really means the world to us and helps get the word out. Here's to growing together and bringing you more incredible content week after week. Until next time, friends, keep chasing your potential and living your best Web3 life.